Welcome to Generative AI Futures. Today we're doing something a little different.
We are.
We aren't looking at, the latest flashy chatbot release or debating which image generator draws hands the best.
No, we are really going under the hood.
And I don't just mean popping the hood to check the oil. We are tearing the engine block apart to look at the physics of how machines actually learn.
It's a huge shift in perspective. I mean, we're moving away from this idea of AI as some kind of alchemical black box.
Right, where you just throw data in and what hope magic comes out.
Exactly. We're moving to what the researchers here call a clear box.
Clear box. I like that because right now, let's be honest, the industry standard feels a bit like buy 10,000 GPUs, burn enough electricity to power a small city, and just pray the model converges.
Well, yeah. It's expensive, it's messy.
And half the time, we don't really know why it works when it works.
Precisely. It's engineering by trial and error. But the research we are covering today proposes that we can, stop guessing. By applying statistical mechanics, essentially the laws of physics, we can mathematically predict whether a neural network will succeed or fail before we ever write a single line of training code.
Okay, that sounds incredibly confident. Like, we can predict the future. The core analogy they use here is one of my favorites. Phase transitions, like water.
It's the perfect metaphor. Think about water. You don't need to run a simulation to know that if you lower the temperature below 0 degrees Celsius at standard pressure, you get ice.
It's just law.
It's a law. The physics dictates the phase. The argument here is that neural networks behave in exactly the same way. They have phases of matter.
So instead of solid, liquid, gas, an AI has ignorance, confusion, and intelligence.
Essentially, yes. If we understand the control parameters, things like network size, the amount of data, and noise levels, we can map out exactly where the network will freeze into a solid state of knowledge.
Or where it'll just blow off into useless, chaotic noise. And the goal of this deep dive is to explore a specific architecture that leverages this physics. We're talking about dense associative neural networks trained with supervision.
Right. And the big promise here is what they call sustainable AI, or SAI.
Which is the why behind all the math we're about to get into, isn't it?
It is. If you can calculate the limits of your system, you stop wasting energy on training runs that are, theoretically doomed from the start. It's all about efficiency.
Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts. The paper talks about going dense. Now, to me, dense usually just means a book is hard to read. What does it mean for a neural network?
To understand dense, you have to look at how neurons talk to each other. In your standard run-of-the-mill neural network, we usually deal with what are called pairwise interactions.
1-to-1.
Right. Neuron A talks to neuron B. It's just a series of couples. Mathematically, we say the interaction order equals 2.
Okay.
But in a dense Hebbian network, we change the rules. We set $2 to be an even integer greater than 2, so maybe 4 or 10 or even 100.
So instead of a bunch of private phone calls, it's more like a conference call.
A very crowded conference call, but a productive one. It means neurons are interacting in assemblies or groups. And when you make that switch, the network gains capabilities that are, frankly, mathematically impossible for the standard shallow networks.
The paper lists 2 specific superpowers here. The first one is ultra storage.
And this is a huge leap in capacity. In a dense network, the number of patterns you can store scales polynomially with the size of the network. It's proportional to $1 to the power of P(O)(1).
Okay, so that exponent is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. If P(O) is large, that number gets massive very, very quickly.
It explodes. You can store a monumental amount of information. But the second superpower is, I think, arguably more important for the real world: ultra tolerance.
Which sounds like a virtue you need when dealing with toddlers, but I'm guessing here it's about data quality.
It is. It's the ability to recognize a pattern even if the input is, well, garbage. We're talking about prohibitive signal-to-noise ratios.
So really noisy data.
Exactly. A dense network can look at an image that is mostly static, barely any recognizable signal. And because of those group interactions, it can essentially vote on what the image is supposed to be and reconstruct it perfectly.
It fills in the blanks.
It sees through the fog.
But here's where my skepticism kicks in. Usually in computer science, there's no free lunch, right? If you increase complexity like this, don't you usually need a massive amount of extra data to train it? Like exponentially more?
That is the intuition, and for unsupervised learning, you would be absolutely right. It would be a data nightmare. But remember, the researchers are focusing on supervised learning.
Ah, so we have a teacher.
We have a teacher, exactly. The teacher pre-sorts the data into classes or archetypes, and the math reveals something really counterintuitive here. When you have that supervision, increasing the interaction order, making the network denser, does not require an exponential increase in dataset size.
Wait, really? So you get the ultra storage and the ultra tolerance, but you don't have to pay the data tax.
You pay a very, very small tax. The data requirement, Malazoller, it just scales proportionally to 1 over toy squared. Where there's data quality, it doesn't explode with Toller's work.
So you can freely upgrade your network's complexity.
You get those superpowers without needing to download the entire internet to train it.
That really does feel like a cheat code.
It's a huge strategic advantage, but, and this is a big but, you have to stay on the map.
Right, the phase diagram.
Yeah.
This is the centerpiece of the research. I want to try and visualize this for you listening. Imagine a map with 3 distinct territories.
And the researchers claim they can mathematically pinpoint exactly where you are on this map at all times. It's defined by the laws of statistical mechanics. It tells us the state of the network.
So let's walk through the territories. Where do we want to be?
We want to be in the retrieval region. On the diagram, it's marked as R. This is the success zone.
The Baha.
Exactly. In physics terms, the system falls into a basin of attraction. Imagine a landscape of rolling hills and valleys. The correct answer is at the bottom of a deep valley. If you drop a ball, your input data, anywhere near that valley, gravity just takes over. It rolls down to the solution. Even if the ball starts halfway up the hill, it finds its way home.
So that's the ultra-tolerance in action. But what happens if we drift into the spin glass region?
Ah, the spin glass phase. This is maybe the most fascinating part of the physics. In this region, the network is, well, it's frustrated.
Frustrated. Like, actually?
That's the actual technical term, frustrated interactions. In the spin glass region, the energy landscape isn't a smooth valley anymore. It's rugged. Think of a golf course full of sand traps and little craters. The ball gets stuck.
In a local minimal.
It gets stuck in a local hollow. It settles down thinking it's reached the bottom, but it's actually miles away from the real solution.
So the AI thinks it knows the answer.
Right. It has high overlap, meaning it recognizes features. It might see a curve, a color, a texture, but it has zero Mattis magnetization, which is the measure of, global alignment with the truth.
You can't see the forest for the trees.
It's hallucinating. It's seeing structure where there is no coherent whole. It's confusion, just frozen in place.
That is a terrifying thought for an autonomous system. I am confident, but I am wrong.
Exactly. And then if you push things even further, you hit the ergodic region.
The static channel.
Pure noise. Just randomness. No learning is possible there. The system is just flipping coins.
So if we're the engineers, we have knobs on our dashboard to steer this thing. The notes mention a few. Network load, dataset quality, temperature.
The most critical one to understand is network load, which is called gamma. This is the ratio of how much you're trying to store versus the physical size of the network. It's how packed the suitcase is.
And there's a limit to that suitcase.
There's a hard limit. This is the critical load, or gamma C.
This is the cliff edge.
It is a phase transition point. If you load the network past this specific number, the system doesn't just slowly get worse, it crashes. The magnetization drops to 0 instantly.
So you go from retrieval to blackout.
Instantly. And this is what we mean by sustainable AI. If you can calculate that number gamma C, you know exactly where the cliff is, you just don't drive off it.
You design the network to operate safely within the theoretical limits, ensuring every bit of energy you spend actually yields intelligence.
Precisely.
Okay, I want to pivot to the how, because getting these numbers implies we can solve the math of these massive complex networks. But my understanding is that once you have neurons interacting in groups, the math gets really messy. The standard bell curves go out the window.
You've hit on the biggest analytical hurdle. In a standard network, the signals coming into a neuron are a sum of lots of small independent inputs. So by the central limit theorem, that looks like a nice, smooth Gaussian bell curve. Easy to calculate.
But in a dense network,
the correlations are too strong, the neurons are gossiping in groups, the signal becomes non-Gaussian, and standard mean field theory, the usual tool in a physicist's kit, it just breaks down.
So how did it solve it? The notes mentioned Guerra's interpolation.
Francesco Guerra. This is a brilliant piece of mathematical machinery. So imagine you have two systems. On one side, you have the real world, this complex, dense network that is impossible to solve directly.
Right.
On the other side, you have a toy model, a system where the neurons don't interact at all. That one is easy to solve.
Right, the unsolvable and the solvable.
Guerra's interpolation essentially builds a mathematical bridge between them. You create a parameter that slides from the easy model to the hard model. You calculate the state of the easy model, and then you track how it changes as you slide across that bridge.
So you kind of sneak up on the answer.
In a way, yeah. It allows you to bound the error. You can prove that the solution for the complex system has to lie within certain limits. It turns an impossible calculation into a solvable inequality.
Which lets us draw those phase diagrams with certainty.
Right. But that handles the theory. The computation is another problem.
Because if I have a billion neurons interacting in groups of 10, that's a number of connections I don't even want to think about.
It's a combinatorial explosion. The synaptic tensor, the list of all the connections, gets too big to store or calculate. This is where the second big technique comes in. Plefka's approximation.
Plefka.
It's a method for effective dynamics. Instead of calculating every single handshake between every neuron, Plefka's expansion lets you approximate the aggregate influence of the system.
So instead of asking every person in the crowd what they think, you just measure the roar of the crowd.
That's a great analogy. It simplifies the interaction term, and it allows for what we call parallel dynamics. You can update the state of the network incredibly fast. The paper says the system can thermalize, reach a stable decision in as few as 1 to 3 steps.
1 to 3 steps. That is lightning fast.
It's basically instant compared to traditional methods, and that's the key to making this design mathematics practical. It's not just an abstract proof, it's a computationally efficient way to run the thing.
So we have the map, we have the bridge, and we have the shortcut. Now, the million-dollar question. Does it actually work?
Yeah.
Because theory is great, but data is messy.
Right, so they validated this using standard benchmarks, MNIST, and fashion MNIST.
The classics. Handwritten digits and pictures of clothing.
Yep. These are structured data sets. They aren't random noise. And the results matched the physics predictions beautifully. As they increased the interaction order pot day, the accuracy went up, the network got more robust.
And did they find the cliff, the critical load?
They did. The network behaved exactly as the phase diagram predicted. It held the memories perfectly until the load crossed that critical line, and then bam, blackout.
There's a concept in the validation section I found really interesting. The grandmother cell. It sounds biological, but how does it fit here?
It's a neuroscience concept, yeah. The idea that you might have one specific neuron that fires only when you see your grandmother.
Okay.
In this dense architecture, because of how they structure the teacher and the archetypes, they effectively create a restricted Boltzmann machine where hidden units act like grandmother cells.
Well, one hidden unit equals one concept.
Ideally, yes. One unit for number 7, one for boot, one for t-shirt. It's a very sparse, energy-efficient way to represent knowledge. You don't need the whole brain to light up to recognize a shoe. You just need the shoe neuron to fire.
That brings me to the dashboard warning light we hinted at earlier. We talked about how dangerous it is to hit that blackout phase. Is there a way to know we're getting close? The notes mention susceptibility.
This is the practical tool for the engineer. Susceptibility is a measure of how sensitive the system is to a tiny change in noise or parameters. Mathematically, it's the derivative of the magnetization with respect to noise.
Okay, let's translate that from calculus to English. What does it actually do for us?
Think of it like a seismograph. When you are deep in the stable retrieval zone, the system is rock solid. Susceptibility is low. But as you approach a phase transition, as you get near the cliff edge, the system starts to wobble, becomes hypersensitive.
So the needle starts spiking.
Exactly. The susceptibility peaks right at the transition line. So if you're monitoring this metric, you get a warning. Warning! Stability decreasing. Approaching phase transition. It lets you pull back before you crash the system.
That turns the abstract physics into a real, legitimate safety feature.
And that is the essence of sustainable AI. We aren't flying blind anymore. We have a map, we have a speedometer, and we have a collision warning system.
So, bringing this all home, we've gone deep into task-spin glasses and Guerra's interpolation. But for the listener who is maybe building a startup or just following the field, what is the big takeaway here?
The takeaway is that the era of brute force AI is hitting a wall. We can't just keep adding more GPUs and hoping for the best. It's economically and, frankly, environmentally unsustainable. This research points to a future where we design intelligence.
We treat it like a bridge. You don't build a bridge by just throwing steel in a river and seeing if it stands up. You calculate the load, you calculate the stress, and you build it once.
Exactly. We are moving toward engineering via physics. It makes AI explainable, predictable, and efficient. It allows us to distinguish between a system that is genuinely learning and one that is just stuck in that spin glass confusion, hallucinating that it knows the answer.
I want to leave everyone with a thought that came up when you were describing the phase transitions. You mentioned that moving from the confusion zone to the retrieval zone involves crossing a mathematical line. It's instant.
It's a sharp transition, yes.
It makes me wonder about our own minds. We've all had that aha moment. You know, you're confused, you're frustrated, you don't get it. And then suddenly, click, everything makes sense.
The pieces all align.
So if we can map that transition in a machine using statistical mechanics, are we effectively writing the physics equation for the aha moment itself? Is understanding just a phase transition like water turning into ice?
That is a profound question. If the aha moment is just the system falling into a basin of attraction, crossing a critical threshold of signal to noise, then yes, we might be looking at the physics of insight.
A physics of insight. I love that. We'll leave you to chew on that. Thanks for diving deep with us on generative AI futures.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.